What happens when society turns the purest form of innocence into fuel for its most destructive addiction? Blender Babies creates an apocalypse that flips everything we know about social collapse on its head by making babies the epicenter of destruction. The story introduces us to an epidemic called the craze, a phenomenon where isolated people begin kidnapping infants to extract and consume their essence, which becomes a highly addictive substance. This goes way beyond simple violence and becomes a complete perversion of our most basic protective instincts. What makes this truly terrifying is how this madness spreads through social media. The book shows us how technology can amplify humanity's darkest impulses, with digital platforms becoming vectors for psychological contagion. It suggests that certain kinds of evil can spread faster than any biological virus when they find the right medium to travel through. Brian Turner represents the desperate father trying to survive in a world where being a parent has become a death sentence. He's trapped in a police station while his family faces unimaginable danger outside, forced to navigate an urban landscape that's been transformed into a hunting ground. His search for his kidnapped daughter becomes a journey that reveals just how fragile family bonds become when society completely falls apart. The kidnapping of Harper, Brian's newborn daughter, represents far more than just individual violence. It's the moment when the abstract horror of the crisis becomes devastatingly personal. Brian's transformation from protected citizen to desperate survivor shows us how social catastrophes force people to completely redefine their moral and physical boundaries. The revelation that the crazed mix babies with a substance called adreno represents a transgression that goes beyond anything we'd consider normal violence. This practice turns vulnerability into a commodity, transforming the natural dependence of infants into a source of exploitation. The addiction to this substance creates a vicious cycle where innocence becomes literally consumable. The baby farms where mothers are confined to maintain reproduction represents the complete industrialization of horror. These facilities turn motherhood into nothing more than a productive function, serving collective addiction. The systematization of this violence shows us that when a society normalizes the unthinkable, it develops terrifyingly efficient structures to perpetuate that evil. The decision to make babies the central target of social collapse isn't random. It represents a direct assault on the hope for the future that children symbolize. When a society literally consumes its future, it condemns itself to extinction that's not just physical but moral. This complete inversion of protective instincts reveals how addiction can corrupt even the most fundamental survival impulses of our species. What makes this book so difficult to process is that it forces us to confront a scenario where natural protection mechanisms have been completely perverted. The novel makes us imagine a world where adults, instead of protecting the most vulnerable, become their most systematic predators. What does it reveal about the nature of evil that a cosmic entity chooses to manifest as what most terrifies children? Stephen King constructs in It a profound exploration of how childhood trauma shapes the human psyche throughout life. Georgie Denbrough's death, bleeding out after trusting Pennywise during a 1957 storm, establishes the fundamental premise: innocence is vulnerable precisely because of its capacity for trust. The paper boat falling down the storm drain becomes a perfect metaphor for how moments of joy instantly transform into nightmares. The Losers Club represents archetypes of human vulnerability. Bill embodies survivor's guilt. Beverly demonstrates how home can be as dangerous as any monster. And each member carries specific marginalization that makes them perfect targets for an entity feeding on fear. King's genius lies in how it amplifies existing fears rather than creating new ones. The creature finds terror where it already exists and magnifies it. Henry Bauer's bullying, Mike's experience with racism, Eddie's overprotective mother, all form the perfect ecosystem for malevolent forces to thrive. It works as a catalyst, converting everyday traumas into supernatural horrors. The novel's 27-year cycle poses a fundamental question: can we really escape childhood fears? The temporal structure suggests evil hibernates rather than disappears. When the losers return as adults, they face amplified versions of their unresolved traumas alongside the entity that once terrorized them. Their blood oath represents unconscious recognition that some evils transcend time. The promise to return if it reappears acknowledges that moral responsibility has no expiration date. Only Mike remaining in Derry suggests someone must maintain vigil against evil when others choose oblivion. Its ability to terrorize Derry for centuries raises disturbing questions about evil's cyclical nature. The town functions as a microcosm of how communities allow evil to flourish through complacency and silence. Is it an external manifestation of evil, or a reflection of something inherently dark in human nature? The description of it as a cosmic entity that plays with your mind through your own fears reveals sophisticated evil that understands human psychology well enough to use our vulnerabilities against us. This suggests our greatest enemies may be internal forces amplified by external influences. King's choice to have it manifest primarily to children responds to specific psychological logic. Children possess vulnerability and belief that makes them both more susceptible to terror and more capable of facing it with pure courage. Their innocence constitutes strength that adults have lost. The true horror lies in how evil prospers in communities that choose not to see. King confronts us with the possibility that the real monster dwells in our capacity to normalize horror when it becomes uncomfortable to face. Derry's collective denial reveals how societies become unwitting accomplices to the evil they pretend to ignore. The Resurrectionist is a novel about Dale McCarty, a man with a chilling supernatural ability. He can bring the dead back to life. But his power comes with a horrifying condition. Anyone he resurrects forgets everything that happened before their death, including how they died. Dale lives in a quiet, seemingly normal neighborhood, but he hides a dark secret. He uses his ability to commit acts of violence, murdering people only to bring them back and erase their memories. This cycle allows him to satisfy his darkest impulses without any visible consequences, since the victims never remember the trauma they endured. His main target is his neighbor, Sarah, whom he obsessively stalks. Dale develops a sick fixation on her, and when he finally captures her, he subjects her to a series of horrific acts. He abuses her, kills her, and then resurrects her again and again. Each time Sarah comes back, Dale manipulates her perception of reality, making her believe nothing ever happened, only to restart the cycle. The protagonist is a psychopath who uses his power as a tool to exploit and control others. His childhood was marked by abuse and trauma, which led to the development of a distorted, empathyless personality. When he discovers his ability to bring people back from the dead, instead of using it for good, his twisted mind sees it as the perfect way to fulfill his darkest urges without facing any consequences. His obsession with Sarah is central to the story. To him, this young neighbor represents some ideal of purity, which drives him to kidnap her and trap her in an endless cycle of violence, murder, and resurrection. The dynamic between them is one of the most disturbing aspects of the novel. Dale tries to manipulate Sarah into developing a form of Stockholm Syndrome, and by repeatedly resurrecting her, he attempts to emotionally reprogram her to depend on him and see him as a protector. However, Sarah, despite the confusion caused by fragmented memories and strange sensations, begins to feel that something is deeply wrong. Her body and mind start to retain subconscious traces of the trauma, creating a constant sense of psychological tension. This makes the story even more unsettling. Dale is not just violent and abusive, he is also a skilled emotional manipulator. His attempts to distort Sarah's perception of reality, to make her believe she is safe with him, adds a disturbing layer of psychological abuse. Sarah loses control over her body and mind and is forced to confront the terrifying truth that Dale can even manipulate death itself, shattering her completely and leaving her with no way to escape. Die You Bastard Die is a novel that follows the story of Claire, an experienced paramedic who dedicates her life to saving others, perhaps as a way to compensate for her traumatic childhood, marked by severe abuse at the hands of her father, known as Big Daddy. Here we encounter our first important psychological concept, reaction formation. Claire chooses a profession where she literally saves lives as an unconscious response to having been deeply hurt during her formative years. It's a way of transforming pain into something constructive, a coping mechanism born out of trauma. Although Big Daddy is a pedophile, he seemed to have the police in his pocket and was never prosecuted for his crimes. Claire managed to escape his control when she turned 18. Years later, she receives a call from her childhood best friend, Olivia, who tells her that Big Daddy has fallen ill. This might be Claire's only chance to confront her past and find closure. This moment represents what psychologists refer to as trauma confrontation. Many abuse survivors avoid any contact with their abusers, but Claire makes the dangerous and courageous decision to return. It's a choice that reveals both immense bravery and a desperate need for resolution. Upon arriving at Big Daddy's house, Claire realizes the situation is far more sinister than she expected. Her father is still abusive and deeply involved in horrific activities, including child exploitation. Things quickly spiral when Claire is captured and subjected to both physical and psychological torture. This is an example of the serial abuser pattern. Such individuals rarely stop on their own. Big Daddy didn't just continue, he escalated. Claire's capture demonstrates how emotional manipulation can be weaponized to draw victims back into the abuser's orbit. As the plot unfolds, Claire is forced to push beyond her moral and physical limits to survive and to seek revenge. As readers, we desperately want things to go well for Claire. We feel her pain as our own. Our empathy for her runs so deep that we start rooting for her revenge. This emotional response is fascinating from a psychological perspective. Normally, violent revenge would strike us as morally troubling, but in the face of Claire's unimaginable suffering, our sense of justice begins to shift. We support her actions. This is known as empathetic vigilante justice. During her captivity, Claire is forced to confront repressed memories and long-buried trauma, pushing her to the brink of both physical and mental collapse. We witness her internal struggle to maintain her humanity or give in to monstrosity. The story begins in 1849 with The Kid. He has no name. He's 14 years old, raised in Tennessee by an alcoholic father and a mother who died in childbirth. He runs away from home and begins wandering through the American Southwest. From the very first moment, everything is violence. There's no pause, no comfort. Fights, murders, torture. McCarthy doesn't offer psychological explanations. He doesn't suggest people are this way for a reason. He simply shows the world as it is when the lights of civilization go out. After several brutal encounters, the kid ends up in Texas and is recruited by Captain White, a military man who wants to invade Mexico on his own. He claims it's to liberate it, but it's clearly driven by ambition. Spoiler, it goes horribly wrong. The expedition is a massacre. The men are ambushed, murdered, tortured. The kid survives, barely. And that's when he joins Glanton's gang. Glanton's gang are mercenaries hired to hunt Apaches and collect their scalps for money. But it quickly spirals out of control. They kill anyone, Mexicans, other tribes, even white settlers. It's no longer a military mission. It's a killing machine disguised as a cause. The story shows that organized violence doesn't need grand reasons. It only needs permission. Among them is the book's most disturbing figure, Judge Holden. A bald, enormous man, white as milk. He seems like something out of a nightmare. But he's not just a killer, he's a thinker, a philosopher of violence. He believes that power is the only real law, that war is God because it reveals the truth. There is no justice, no good or evil, only strength and weakness. And what's most unsettling is that he's not insane. Everything he says is reasoned. He's thought it through. He's concluded this. The judge sees something in the kid that disturbs him, a flicker of compassion, a trace of humanity. And that irritates him. Because for the judge, that's a weakness, an illusion that must be corrected. The book has no heroes, no redemption. Those who seek meaning are destroyed. Chaos isn't interpreted, it's survived. McCarthy describes atrocities with the same beauty he uses to portray the landscape. There's no difference between a massacre and a sunset. Violence isn't foreign to humanity, it's part of what we are. Blood Meridian is a descent into the raw core of existence. It offers no relief, no answers. Only the truth of what remains when everything else falls away. And that vision, so clear and so unbearable, is what makes it unforgettable. What happens when material success becomes a mask for complete moral bankruptcy? American Psycho explores this through Patrick Bateman, whose polished exterior conceals depths of depravity that mirror an entire era's spiritual emptiness. Bateman embodies the logical endpoint of unchecked capitalism and narcissism. Working as a Manhattan investment executive, he possesses everything society values: wealth, status, and physical perfection. Yet beneath this facade lurks a psychopath whose violent impulses grow as his emotional connections weaken. The first-person narration traps readers inside a disturbed mind that presents horror as routine. Bateman describes brutal murders with the same detached precision he uses for skincare regimens. This forces readers to experience his twisted logic while becoming complicit in his worldview. Obsessive consumer culture reveals how materialism substitutes for authentic human connection. Brand names and status symbols serve as Bateman's primary language. His ritualistic approach to grooming and dining suggests someone desperately constructing identity through consumption, filling the void where empathy should exist. Bateman targets society's most vulnerable members, exposing how privilege protects predators. Homeless individuals and sex workers become victims while his wealth shields him from consequences. This reflects systemic failures that allow the connected to operate with impunity. The ambiguity surrounding his crimes forces uncomfortable questions about reality and delusion. As narration becomes unreliable, the line between murders and fantasies blurs. This mirrors our uncertainty about people who present polished personas while harboring dark impulses. American Psycho crafts a disturbing mirror reflecting consequences when societies abandon moral foundations for material achievement. The horror lies in recognizing how Bateman's worldview permeates the culture that created him.